Old Grumpy Hunter here.
Before I go any farther, I want to apologize in advance for the dogs barking and other background noises you will hear throughout this video.
In another of my videos, I stated that penetration is directly related to momentum. Well, that's not 100% correct, but then it's not 100% wrong either. Momentum is defined as mass in motion. Any object that is moving has momentum because all objects have mass. Momentum is a great reference tool, but not necessarily a direct indication of penetration because not all momentum is created equal. Let's look at two arrows. Arrow 1 weighs 350 grains and has an initial speed of 400 feet per second. Arrow 2 weighs 400 grains and has an initial speed of 300 feet per second. The two arrows have the same momentum. With all else being equal, which one do you think will have the greater potential for penetration? Both?
Lighter faster, heavy slower.
How can they have the same momentum? Momentum is dependent on mass and speed. The formula for momentum is P equals mv, which means 350 times 400 equals 400 times 350. Momentum is expressed in slugs. Taking a look at the formula, when mass provides more of the product than velocity, the harder it is to stop a moving object. Since the momentum formula usually uses metric values, to put it into useful values like grains and feet per second, there has to be a conversion factor. That factor is 225,400. You divide the formula by the factor. P, momentum, equals mass times velocity divided by 225,400. Now the momentum can be expressed as slugs or feet per second squared. Newton's first law of motion, the law of inertia, says that an arrow at rest stays at rest, and an arrow in motion stays in motion at the same speed and in the same direction. In other words, moving arrows want to keep moving. This resistance to the state of motion is inertia. Think of it like this. When you make a sudden stop in your vehicle, your body wants to continue moving forward. It's the inertia that keeps your body moving. Inertia depends solely upon mass. More mass equals more inertia. Objects resist changes in motion differently. This difference varies with mass. The mass of an object is the sole measurement that inertia is dependent on. The greater the mass, the greater the inertia. The more mass, the greater the resistance to changes in the state of motion. Both inertia and momentum fight the forces that are trying to slow the arrow down. Forces like wind resistance, gravity, and tissue. Newton's second law describes the changes that a force can produce on a body in motion. It states that a body's change in momentum is equal to both strength and direction of the force imposing upon it. Frequently, inertia and momentum are interchanged, but they are two different things. Inertia is an object's resistance to the change in motion. Momentum describes how much motion an object has. I talked about resistance to both wind and tissue in other videos. Let me just summarize it quickly. When the speed is doubled, the resistance factor increases by 4. That means the faster, lighter arrow will have 4 times the resistance in both air and tissue than the slower, heavy arrow. To experience the change in resistance, stick your hand out the window at 30 miles an hour, which it happens to be 44 feet per second, and then again at 60 miles an hour. Here's the formula to calculate resistance if you wish to do that.
Wait a minute there, old grumpy hunter. You're shooting a crossbow that has an initial speed that is twice that of my traditional bow and zips through animals. Why are you so concerned with momentum, inertia, and mass?
I don't always have a pass-through. Of the hogs I've shot, only this one has had a pass-through. All my crossbow kills, I've only at 50% had a total pass-through on impact. 16.7% worked their way through, and 33.3% just stuck there. Maybe if we look at a bullet, this would make more sense. Like when an arrow leaves the bow, as soon as the bullet leaves the barrel, the only forces working on it are wind resistance and gravity. It is momentum that drives a bullet deeply into the target to reach the vital organs. When the bullet hits the target, kinetic energy is transferred to the target, creating wound channels, and that is what kills. It is the momentum that gets the bullet deeply into the target. Momentum is important. Let's look at heavy calibers and heavy bullets at or greater than 400 grains at medium speeds. It's the momentum and the inertia caused by the high mass of the bullet that gets the bullet through the heavy muscle and thick bones, so there can be a transfer of kinetic energy. But lighter calibers are moving at a higher speed, still require inertia and momentum for penetration. It's the expansion of the bullet and transfer of kinetic energy that kills. Momentum and inertia do not contribute to the knockdown or kill factors of a bullet. It's the inertia and momentum that got the bullet there. It's the momentum and inertia that causes heavier bullets to travel further given enough velocity. The heavier, more massive bullet fights with the atmosphere, and the momentum keeps it going through the air. The USS Missouri, an Iowa-class battleship, had guns that fired 1,900 and 2,700-pound projectiles up to 24 miles away. Lighter bullets will lose their flight faster, even with a higher muzzle velocity. All this can be applied to an arrow other than the kinetic energy for the most part. A 100-grain 6mm bullet with a muzzle velocity of 3,100 feet per second has 20 times more kinetic energy than a 400-grain arrow with an initial speed of 350 feet per second. We all know that arrows do not have anywhere as much kinetic energy as a bullet, and that it's cutting action of the broadhead that causes the bleeding, which leads to the animal's death.
Anyone still here?
As soon as the arrow leaves the bow, two forces are acting upon the arrow: drag and gravity. How far the arrow travels before hitting the ground is dependent on its mass and initial speed. And in the perfect environment, the arrow would never stop moving. Okay, let's run some numbers. Let's say my crossbow is shooting at 300 feet per second, and your traditional bow is shooting at 150 feet per second. My arrow with point weighs 435 grains, and your arrow weighs 600 grains. The result is my arrow has 0.57 slugs of momentum, and your arrow has 0.33 slugs of momentum. Which arrow do you think will have the greatest resistance in air? Which arrow do you think will have the greatest resistance at impact? Which arrow do you think will have the greater potential for penetration? The arrow shot from the traditional bow has the potential of greater penetration.
What? How can that be?
The key word here is potential. There are a few reasons. Recall that inertia is dependent only upon mass, and that inertia does not change. The greater the mass, the greater the inertia the object has. The greater the inertia, the harder it is to change motion. The slower, heavier arrow's momentum comes more from its mass than its speed. Mathematically, the ratio is 4:1, mass to velocity, where the crossbow's momentum ratio is 1.45:1, mass to velocity. The faster an object is moving, the more resistance it meets. The arrow from the crossbow has over 4 times the resistance of that of the arrow from the traditional bow. Momentum decreases as speed decreases. At 30 yards, the traditional bow will have retained more of its speed than the arrow from the crossbow. This is because the faster arrow has more drag. Think of momentum as energy retention and downrange penetration potential. Momentum favors heavier arrows while kinetic energy favors speed. You need to find that sweet spot. Going with a lighter arrow will increase the speed and boost the kinetic energy, but can reduce your overall momentum and which in turn can reduce your depth of penetration. Increasing an arrow's weight will slow the arrow down. If I increase my arrow's weight from 435 grains to 590 grains, that is a change of 151 grains. On paper, that will slow my arrow by 77.5 feet per second. I say on paper because in actual testing it slows it only by 42 feet per second. Where that extra weight is placed matters also. By adding that weight towards the business into the arrow, it can also improve the arrow's penetration because it's making the arrow fly more straight. This table shows the momentum. And for you kinetic energy gals and guys, the kinetic energy of my crossbow's initial setup with a 435 grain arrow, and the initial speed along with the calculated and measured speeds with a 190 grain arrow at both firing and at 30 yards. You may have noticed that the flight times difference between the minimum and maximum is only 8/100ths of a second. What works for this old grumpy hunter may or may not work for you. Only you can decide what is best for you and your bow, be it a vertical bow or a crossbow. Only you can decide how much your arrow should weigh. Only you can decide how much speed you need. The one thing that you need to remember is, until next time, aim small, miss small. Thank you for watching this Old Grumpy Hunter presentation. Please give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to push the notification bell.